Hi, and welcome to episode 275 of the Untethered Podcast. Today we have Michelle Elmasri joining us. Michelle is a passionate pediatric speech-language pathologist who earned her master's degree in 2018. She began her career in a school setting where she quickly discovered her love for helping children. She was eager to make a more significant impact, so she transitioned into a clinic, fulfilling a long-time dream. However, Michelle's journey didn't stop there. After experiencing burnout, she realized there was a significant gap in education for specific medical therapy practices. This insight led her to create the Pediatric Source, a platform dedicated to empowering pediatric therapists with specialized evidence-based education. In addition to her work in direct therapy, Michelle has ventured into the world of healthcare technology. She currently works for an EMR company that supports SLPs, OTs, and PTs, which has given her fresh perspectives and exciting challenges, broadening her professional horizon. Michelle loves the therapy world and thrives on meeting fellow therapists. She's deeply committed to creating a community where therapists can support and uplift each other. Her goal is to foster a better, more supportive world for therapists and the incredible work that they do. Quick disclaimer, all information, content, and material of this podcast are the opinions of the speakers and is for the informational purpose only and not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified healthcare provider. Welcome to the Untethered Podcast. I am your host, Hallie. I'm a certified myofunctional therapist, feeding specialist, podcaster, business owner, and mentor. This podcast is all about getting your questions answered and collaborating with colleagues to bring you the most up-to-date information in the orofacial myofunctional therapy, airway, tethered oral tissue, and pediatric feeding therapy space. If you're new here, I challenge you to keep an open mind and join my mission to spread this message far and wide. If you've been around since June 2019, thanks for being a loyal listener. As we jump into today's episode, remember to listen with correct oral rest posture. Tongue up, lips closed, teeth apart, breathe through your nose. Let's get started. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I know this is going to be a fun conversation. I mean, they all are, but I know we're going to talk like business stuff today. But, before we dive into that, I would just love for everybody to know who you are, share with us and you can start from graduating graduate school up until where you are today. What are you doing today as a speech pathologist and how did you get here?
Okay, there's a lot here. So I graduated in 2018 and I've been practicing pretty much ever since. And I never thought that I would end up here where I am today, and I'm going to get into that. So I've always wanted to be a medical SLP. That was my dream. But when I graduated, I only found school placements. And because I was so desperate to get in, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take it. Then I ended up not necessarily being burnt out, but it really wasn't what I loved doing. I felt like more so a tutor because all of my speech students were mostly academic and I wasn't doing any speech stuff. I was doing science and social studies and English and all these things that it's not really speech therapy. And then I wanted to switch, and this was around COVID, and I found your course. And when the Feed the Peds 5-day workshop, and when I had goosebumps all over my arm, this is it. This is what I need to be doing. And then I was just thinking about during your whole course, I'm like, wow, if I had this years ago when I was born, because I was thinking back to all of the food aversions I have. And I tell my speech friends, I'm like, I have an audible swallow. I'm not doing it right. And I know it's because of something that happened when I was a kid. And then I just dove into that. And I was so adamant on getting into a medical setting, which I did. Because I told them during the interview, I took Hallie's course, and they're like, okay, here's the job, pretty much. So that's how I got into the medical field because of Feed the Peds. And then I struggled a lot. I'll be very honest. I was not cut out for that. I went from everything academic to everything medical. And I thought I'm going to have nothing but myo and oral motor and feeding. And I was so wrong. I had everything. And I had no idea what to do. So I became super burnt out to the point where I thought I hated speech therapy. I was done. And I'm like, I never want to do this ever again. I felt like a huge imposter too. And I'm like, I'm just not cut out for this. And then I remember even driving to work and thinking like, oh, there has to be a way. Like there has to be something where I can just like find all this information easily. I'm not like stuck in textbooks. And that was, I guess that's kind of how I decided my business, just that struggle alone. But that came my business came later. So once I thought, all right, I'm done with speech, I never want to do this again, I took a couple of step backs. Like I was on it. I took courses left and right. Like I'm a course addict. And then I took a huge break. No courses, nothing hard. I did remote teletherapy, SLP, while also trying to get a corporate job outside of speech. Like I was done. And then I landed that job, but during that time, I was like, wait, I really miss speech. So I did not do speech services for 2 months. I lasted 2 months without speech. And then I was like, you know what, I need to start my business. And this is kind of where I am. I now have my platform. I still have a couple clients on the side, and I'm still in like the corporate tech side of the world, the speech world.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so much to unpack here. So first of all, I don't know if you've heard have you heard like my whole story? Like how,
Yeah.
like I quit being a speech pathologist for like 8 months and was like, oh, I miss the kids, and like came back, went to work for a private practice for like a year, was like, I can't do this, opened my own practice. And that was 10 years ago. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's so wild. And then as I moved into like the online space and was like really truly stepping into like being an online CEO, not just like private practice CEO, I was like, I don't have time for all the things. Right. And I then had a couple kids on the side because I enjoyed it still. And so I was like, I still want to dabble in this a little bit. I still want to work with some of these cases, but eventually, like I don't treat right now. Like I'm not actively treating. And I used to say I'm on a sabbatical, and now I feel like I'm on like a permanent sabbatical from treating.
It's a lot. It's a lot to juggle it all. It's a lot.
Well, there's only so many hours in the day. And you know what's so interesting too? Like I was telling you just before we recorded, I agreed to do this like Instagram live with a dentist that's local to my private practice up in Virginia. And it was so fascinating to me because I even had a little bit of imposter syndrome for a little bit. Cause I'm like, I have not been on someone's podcast in a while. I haven't I'm like, hi, I keep up with the research. Like I teach and feed the peds. Like we're even doing, it's like TOTS module this week in this current round and the Myo module next week. Like I'm in the thick of like teaching it, right? But I'm like, I'm not assessing and treating it directly right now. So I get into that like imposter syndrome stuff too. But it was so funny because just like having this hour-long Q&A where like they were just asking me questions and I didn't really know what was coming next. I just dove right back into it like I never left. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like it's just so natural and secondhand now. And so it's so fascinating though to step back and like reflect, right? Because if you had asked me like 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, what I'd be doing today. And if I'd be doing this, I probably would have looked at like, I would have been like, well, yeah, I want an online business, but like, I never would have imagined like back then, right? Like what I'm doing now. So do you feel like, have you had any similar like experiences around that?
Yeah, I mean, my cousin asked me when I launched, he was like, did you ever think you were going to do this? And to some capacity, I've always wanted to own a business. And then I remember in grad school, I was just playing around with like WordPress, I think, and I made a website called Speechies Unite. And then, I dropped it. I was like, this was so silly. We have TPT. This is never going to work. And then I think somehow with just my experience, like maybe that idea was always in my head and it just developed into the platform that I have now. So I feel like yes and also no, like if that makes sense. Like
100%. Yes, because I was the same way. I was like, I always know I'm going to own a business. Like I thought I knew what it might look like, but like it looks nothing like what I imagined.
Yeah.
And back when I was going to own a business, I also thought it was going to be in the financial like sector. Like I never thought I'd be a speech pathologist. Like I remember being in college and not doing well in my business classes as a freshman and being like, I don't need these classes to own a business. Like, forget that. And then I switched to education. My dad's like, you're never going to make enough money as an educator working in the schools to support your lifestyle where you live. And I was like, oh, okay. But also, I never wanted to be like a classroom teacher because I'm too ADHD for that. I always joke, I'm like, I need different. Like I can't be in the same setting every day, which is why I thrived on traveling to like in the car, right? I'm going to patients' homes and schools and daycares and whatever. And then coming home and doing some virtual. And it was like that mix of different patients in different settings. Like it kept me on my toes, but it also like lit me up and like kept the fire burning, you know? It's like I needed that, like to not become complacent. And so I'm like, I highly respect teachers, but I'm like, I would go crazy, like being in a classroom every day, which I was like, joke's on me because I literally got put in a preschool classroom in a public school setting, but a preschool education programs, classrooms, closet as a first-time speech pathologist right out of school. Like I literally drilled the shelves off the wall with maintenance so that I could push my desk in, which went against the door that did not close to said closet. And then I had a filing cabinet and there was maybe 2 feet of space for a chair. Like I never actually sat in there because it was so claustrophobic. And like, I'm like, you're in a classroom, like you can't. So I'd never really had a speech room. So I was always plugging in anyways with the kids. And I just learned to like make it work for me. But man, that's why I'm not in the schools anymore. I was so jaded after my first couple of years in the schools.
Do it. Yeah. I mean, I've had sessions everywhere. Bathrooms, like the teachers' bathrooms, cafeterias.
Wow.
Yeah. City life. There's not a lot of space, but I've had a very similar experience where I'm like, I'm not helping.
Right. That's how I felt too. I was like, this is for somebody else. There's somebody else who would be better at this job in this setting. And that someone is not me. I was like, I can go. I can be flexible. I can think on my toes when I'm with a kid. I was like, and I can adapt. I was like, but this is like beyond, like I was crying like every day. And there's that like whole like Asha joke, like just go cry in your car. Like I literally would come home crying. And to the point where like I had an agreement with the university. They were supposed to pay for all, but they ended up paying for most of my grad school education. And in turn, I signed a 3-year contract to work for them in the county. And so I was like stuck and like, I didn't have the money. I didn't have the money to pay them back. So I couldn't break the contract. So instead I just cried every day because, you know, I'm like wanting to be your own boss and also like wanting to drive your own ship. And then being stuck in a contract where you're literally miserable. I was like, I never want this ever again in my life. How do we avoid this?
Yes. I mean, being stuck, and that's how they get you too. Like, I mean, my CF, I taught at a high school. Now I love high schoolers, but there was some stuff that were a little inappropriate. And I'm like, these kids are taller than me. I'm probably like I don't ever want to work with a high schooler ever again for that reason. But again, my hours were highly dependent on attendance rate. And then when you're in high school, you sometimes kids, you know, you're too cool to be in school. And so my CF took a lot longer just because the attendance rate. Now that was in the beginning. Then after a while, I couldn't kick them out of the speech room. And their attendance rates were amazing. The principal of the school was like, wow, like we have like a 96% right now. And like, that's never been the case. They wanted me to stay, but
you're like, you can't pay me enough.
Well, it wasn't that. It was just the DOE school at the time. They didn't take CFs. They needed someone to supervise me. And for that reason, I couldn't join. And because I wanted to finish my CF, I had to switch.
Yeah, because you're in New York, right?
Yeah.
New York has like all kinds of like wonky laws that don't exist in many other states in the US.
Probably, yeah.
Because like when I was like my CF, so I basically was on contract. So my salary, I was getting paid the same as a teacher. So it was like also jokes on me. Haha. Thanks, Dad. Like, don't become a teacher because, you know, you'll be able to support your lifestyle. And here I am on a teacher salary and pay scale. Fantastic. Even though I had a master's, I was like, fantastic. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, no, I basically was locked in and had the job. And that's almost why it was sort of like, it'd be silly not to take this deal because they're paying for grad school and you have a guaranteed job somewhere in the county. But what they didn't tell me was I wasn't allowed to do infants and toddlers out the gate because I only had gone into like the preschool program. And so they're like, oh no, you can't start like in infants and toddlers, even though I knew somebody who did. And they were like, well, she had an outplacement. And I was like, well, I asked for one, but you didn't give it to me. Like, I didn't know that was going to penalize me with my actual job. So I think there was that. I was also split between 2 schools. One of the schools was like the one of the 2 schools in the county that was like a self-contained school for special needs. And everyone there understood what we did and they appreciated us. And it was like a really nice place to work. And then there was the other school where I was in the closet, as I mentioned, and that was just in a typical elementary school. It was the first year that they ever had a preschool education program, like for special needs, children with special needs and everything, like in their school setting. And they had no clue what the program did outside of a typical preschool, let alone what a speech pathologist would do in that program. Yeah. So it was like such night and day. I remember I had like 56 kids across both settings. Okay. Mind you, some of these kids were only in school 2.5 hours, 4 days a week. And I was only at that school 2 of those days. So here I am with like, let's say half my kids, 25 kids. I have a total of 5 hours a week that I can see 25 kids. They all have anywhere from 30 minutes, but most had at least 45 or even sometimes 90 minutes a week, which they need and deserve, but can't pull them, free and reduced meals were a thing, right? So like, can't pull them from breakfast or lunch, can't pull them from specials. I'm like, so now I have a 30-minute window twice a week where I can see all the children. What? Like, it's not realistic. It's not feasible. And that's where I also was just like, I'm out. I'm not, you guys want to do illegal things. That's fine. I'm not going to be a part of this.
Yeah. And then you do get penalized if you don't see them because the school needs that tracked. Yeah. Yep. I remember it all.
Well, and there were kids like on Medicare because we were like not a Title I school, but we were like 1% above being one. It's like every year this school should have qualified, so they would have gotten more resources. But and I guess that's a state thing. The state kept raising it. So if it was like 79% of your kids need to be on free and reduced meals, we're going to bump it up to 80%. And we're like, oh, but we're at 79%. And that qualified for this year, but not next year. And you just bumped it up last year too. Okay, got it. So like, who loses here? The children, that was the whole thing. I was just like, the public schools are not for me. I cannot handle the red tape, the bureaucracy, like all of this. Like, I'm like politics. No, like that has no place in speech pathology. And like you, I was like, I want to be more of a medical SLP, not an educational SLP. Nothing wrong with that, but that was just where my interest lied. And it was funny too, because when I started, I was like, I want feeding cases. And they were like, we don't do that in the schools. And then 3 months later, somebody goes on maternity leave and they give me a classroom of children who are all like, very medically complex. And half of them had feeding goals and they all had 24-hour nursing care with them. And like, I was like, oh, you don't do that in the schools. Okay. But except for this classroom. Got it. Like, I was like, illegal. My bells are going off. Like, there's so much wrong with this whole thing. And I was like, I don't want any part of this. I'm just going to expose you all.
That's another reason why I left the schools, was because in the high school that I worked at, my kids weren't doing well. Like some of them, and then I spoke to like a couple of special ed teachers, and they're like, they need a different classroom. And then they said, well, that's never going to happen because of funding. It affects funding. So that hurt. That was my first year. And I was like, this breaks my heart, because you care so much about your funding, but there are so many of your students who are falling behind because you don't want to do what's right. So
Yeah.
And then I have no control over that. I'm not the one implementing these policies. So I also left for that.
You're expected to basically sit there and keep your mouth shut and pretend like you don't know that any of this is going on. And when they started like putting kids, there was a director of a preschool program who actually was sitting next to the teacher while she was on this phone call, because we had to, like, the kid had graduated from speech. Thank goodness. Like, he doesn't need it anymore, right? Well, that also means he doesn't qualify for a next year for like the preschool program, the free preschool program, but like he could move into like, they were starting some pilot program that like had paid. It was paid for the children who like were typically developing and didn't need to be in the classroom, and it was free for those on an IEP, and they wanted like a mix of that to have like, typically developing peers. I was like, okay, cool model, whatever. They wanted to qualify children. They were telling this teacher to qualify the child who didn't qualify just to meet, right, the numbers they needed. And I sat next to this teacher, and I won't say her name, but I was like, give me the phone. And I already knew I was on my way out. Like I was like, I'm out of here. I'm like, I was going to infants and toddlers. So I was like, I'm not going to have to deal with this person anymore. And then I left a year later, like altogether. But I was like, give me the phone. And I was so obnoxious. Like I said to this woman, I was like, what you are asking her to do, I understand that, like that she's a subordinate to you, but like, this is a power play. This is illegal. You cannot ask somebody to, this puts her license on the line. I was like, I don't work for you. I work for the speech department. I was like, but this is not okay. And I understand this may be highly disrespectful that I'm speaking to you like this. I was like, but I cannot stand by in my like, and ethically, like watch what you're asking, like what you're basically forcing somebody to do. And like, this is the kind of stuff that goes on all the time. And it's so disgusting.
And everywhere.
Like, yeah, and it needs to be exposed. Like I feel like parents need to know. And so the best part of opening a private practice for me was then getting to advocate for families and be like, go to the schools and ask for this and tell them that if they don't have the staffing, that is not your problem. They need to hire somebody and this, that, and the other. And when they tell you this, you say that. And then parents started paying me to come attend the meetings for them. I'm like, I'm not an advocate, right? But I worked in the county and I know what they're going to try and pull to not give services that a child needs and deserves. And so I was like, it was so rewarding to sit on the other side of the table and to be like slipping the parent a paper and be like, ask for this, like use these buzzwords because they can't say no.
Yeah. And that's what you need to do. No one, unfortunately parents, and not parents' fault, it's not anyone's fault, but no one tells parents
they don't
how
know.
Things are done. So they don't know. Even when I worked at the clinic, I had some parents come to me and say, well, the report didn't really match what my child was. And sometimes I had to explain because, battling with insurance, it's a whole other thing that I don't want to get into, but I can. But I'm like, sometimes we have to,
write things a certain way.
Sometimes we are encouraged to over-exaggerate a couple things so that you get services. And that bugs me too. That bugs me so much because your child isn't that severe, for example, but
they
I
still
have to write it.
Yeah. Well, and it's like they still need services. It should still be covered in a lot of those cases, right? And so it's kind of just, I always wrote that off to like, and I never took insurance, but like I always wrote it off like when we did write something to help a family, like we're basically playing the insurance game. Like you could, like two can play this game because insurance is just a whole nother, like we don't have to go there, but it's definitely a whole nother piece of the screwed up puzzle.
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually something that I like to say a lot now. It's like, I don't hate speech. I hate the systems in place for it. And that's my motto.
Yeah, no, it's so true and so beautifully said. Okay, so let's focus on more of what you're doing now. So share with us, like, because you've made this like shift and like so early on in your career, which I love for you. I like knew early on too that I wanted, and actually I tried to launch something like a couple years into my private practice and it just was a flop. And I like then stopped in my tracks and like didn't do anything else for like 5 years because I was just like, let me just focus on the private practice. And then when I circled back in 2019 and started this podcast and, launched Feed the Beats in 2020 and the rest is history, it's just like, it's so funny to like look back and be like, wow, like I'm so glad I didn't quit for good and give up. Like I knew I always wanted to do another thing, which is like, it sounds very much so like you kind of like dabbled in your first website and you were like, oh, this is not really going to take off because there's TPT or whatever. And like you shifted. And I love that. I just want to like commend you for that because I think that it's admirable in the sense that so many people will try like one thing, it won't work, and they just quit and they stop in their tracks. And it's enough to stop them like for good. Or they'll say like, oh yeah, when X happens, I'll do Z. Like, oh, when B happens, I'll do A. Oh, and it's like this thing has to fall into place before I go and try that again. And I feel like you're kind of like, I'm burnt out. There's got to be something better. Like, what else can I do? So that's where you were. And at what point did you like walk away from like, I know you're still treating a little bit on the side, but like, when was it that you walked away from like treating full time?
I want to say 2022. Nope, I'm joking. 2023. But 2023, I was already doing part-time tech and part-time, like I was working still for that agency. And then that summer was my last summer of seeing so many kids. But yeah, I missed it. But now that I have full control and I'm in charge of it, I love it even so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? It's like when you have the autonomy, like and the freedom to do it the way that it's meant to be done.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, and there's probably a conversation there too, because you've worked for a private practice, and obviously we're not going to ask you who you worked for or what your experience was necessarily. But I speak with so many now business owners or people who have opened their own business because they didn't like how it felt to be an employee, and they wanted to change the system. They wanted to change the processes. They wanted to create an environment where it was fun to go to work, where people love what they do, where people enjoy working with the patients, where people respect each other. You know, it's like just so many things that, you know, I felt like I was working for somebody just for a year in private practice, and I had full autonomy because I basically was traveling to everyone's house, and there was no home base. It was, or there was no like, you know, clinic or anything. So like I rarely was interacting with like other team members, but it gave me like total freedom. And that's kind of where I was like, oh, like, yeah, this is kind of what I was doing before in infants and toddlers for a year. But now it's like, I broke free of the system, the county and all that.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I could totally do this like myself. Right. And the rest, like I said before, the rest is history. So yeah. So for you, like, did you ever have like any, I'm just curious, did you ever like think like, oh, I'll own my own private practice? Or did you like want to, did you try? Like, talk to us about that.
All right. So naive me, when I was in grad school, I'm like, yep, I'm going to have my own private practice. I'm ready. And I had a professor, and I told her my goal. I'm like, I want a private practice. And she's like, everyone wants a private practice. And it was just, I was like, oh, okay. She's like, not everyone goes for it. And I'm like, oh, please. Like, I won't be that number. And then my experience at the private practice wasn't the best, but I also love that it happened. And I think I had to do a lot of self-assessment. Like, I take responsibility where I went wrong, and I also get to evaluate like certain things, why, you know, asking the why, like, why are certain policies in place? A lot of it doesn't always have to do with the owner. A lot of it has to do with the systems and the insurance, and kind of like, it's all systematic. So I think in my head though, during that time, I'm like, I never want to open a clinic. Like, that was me when I was done with speech. And then the way that I started services again was because someone reached out to me looking for a therapist. And I was like, I'll find you one. It's not going to be me, but I'll find one for you. And then I couldn't, because there was a wait list. And then I started doing research in the town that I live in now. And I'm like, wow, there aren't many therapists available. And I couldn't handle letting like a child not go without services. And I'm like, you know what? I will take it. I'll do it. And that's how it started. So in a way, it's not an office, it's not a brick and mortar, it's home care. And I like that so much more too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's the natural environment. It's so nice. I really like getting to like interact with the families. And I think it's like, you know, or the caregivers or whoever's there, going into daycares or preschools or whatever. I think it's a nice change on like the system, right? And the typical,
Yes.
and it kind of deviates from what insurance typically dictates needs to happen, and it's sort of like F the system. I'm like, it's basically how I live my life. But no, I think that's amazing, and I love that you kind of responded to the demand. And I think it sounds like you also did like some soul searching and a little bit of a check-in to be like, hey, I didn't think it was going to be, but hey, maybe like I actually do want it to be me because there isn't anybody else. And if you were like an absolute like heck no, you never would have taken that patient on regardless. You know what I mean? So like a part of your heart is still so much like in, you know, the speech therapy assessment treatment side that you're kind of like, all right, I'll do this. But also I always tell people, I'm like, if you feel called to do something, just like kind of roll with it and see what happens. Like you're never committed for life. Like you're never like tied down. Like you can always make a change. And I think I coach a lot of like business owners, right? And like a lot of times I think people think that like that tiny little decision is like a life changing, like never ending thing they're saying yes to. And I'm like, nothing is ever, nothing ever is that heavy. I think we just kind of make stories and like in our head and like based on, and a lot of it's based on past experiences from when we felt a certain way, like burnt out or overworked, or we worked somewhere else. And so I'm like, I love that you're kind of getting to create your own like reality and create new stories for yourself. And It sounds like things are going well. And now you have time to work on your other business ventures. So tell us like the name of like what you started and everything, and like where can people find it? Like tell us all about it.
All right, so the name is the Pediatric Source, and it's meant to like bring in OTs, PTs, SLPs. I even have a couple of like lactation consultants on there. And it started again because I had a hard time. I had all these cases like AAC, apraxia. What else did I have? Like torticollis. And I was like, oh, I have no idea what to do with this. And I gathered a ton of speakers. And honestly, my platform wouldn't exist if it weren't for them. Like, they're the experts. I'm just the host, essentially. And they're just as passionate. They put the content together. We currently have 10 topics right now. And my speakers are amazing. They're so passionate. I keep on saying them because it's true. And they really put so much love into this course. And they kind of like, we still text here and there because like, how's it going? And it's just a great platform, one, to begin with. And then the second reason that I created it was to help other therapists who are struggling just like me, who want to make the transition into a medical setting from a school setting, or just as a CF, right? You want to do more medical things, but you don't feel prepared in grad school. That's another common story that all therapists share.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much how the Pediatric Source was born. And the website is thepediatricsource.com, and Instagram is also the Pediatric Source.
Amazing. I love that you clarified that it's like really geared towards the med SLP or med SLB who like the person who wants to be a med SLP or OTPT, you want to work with pediatrics, but more on the medical side. So is it like a single course with like modules or is it like a host of different courses, or like, is it all kind of one and the same?
It's a course with all the modules in one.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. I love that. That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm like thinking back to especially when I was starting with like pediatric patients. And then I feel like that brought more medically complex kiddos into my space. And sometimes I would be like, I don't know what to do with these kids. Hold on, let me go talk to a colleague. Like, I'm like, I know what to do when it comes to feeding, and I know how to collaborate with other professionals to figure out like where to go on the feeding route. But like, I feel like there's more. And how do we figure out even who to refer to for like other specialized interventions? So I like that you have like the whole team kind of coming together, like SLP, OT, PT, you mentioned lactation, so that it's, I think you get a dose of like a little bit of everything, and kind of knowing like where do we go next or who do we refer to is a great tool to have in your belt.
Which is also, collaboration is key. I as an SLP, I'm not going to look at the same child as an OT or a PT. And so just having those different perspectives I think is really important to know too. Also through this platform, I myself learned that in some states that sometimes there are no speech therapists in the NICU. It's the OTs doing the feedings, or there are no OTs and it's just SLPs or just PTs. So it's like, oh, that's actually interesting because you need to know everything then.
Yeah. Right. Right. And it's interesting too, because like when it comes to swallowing and certain things, I'm like, well, that requires the SLP. Why? So when I remember when I learned that SLPs are actually, I feel like, less commonly in the NICU than OTPT, I was like, hold up. What? Hold on. Wait, what are you talking? And they're like, well, the nurses feed the babies. And I'm like, I'm not talking about who's like physically feeding the baby with a bottle. Like, I'm talking about the people who are assessing and intervening when there is a swallowing disorder, dysfunction going on, like dysphagia. Like, what? I was like, tell me more. I'm not understanding. And still to this day, I still am not fully understanding. Like, I have 100% respect for our OTPT colleagues, but I feel like we both need to be working together. And I feel like even like all three disciplines have very different things that we do. There is some overlap, right? But like we all have certain things that the other professional is not licensed or is not in their scope to do. So I'm like, why? And obviously this all goes back to health insurance, which dictates everything. Because I'm pretty sure that like OTPT can bill codes like that are time, based, that are probably billed higher than an SLP. And I feel like it probably started somewhere with a biller or a department that basically said, we are not making enough money in the NICU. Here's how we can make more. Support all these machines that are running and all these professionals and whatever. So who knows?
But it all does come down to money.
Oh,
a lot of places, schools, centers. Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
Yes.
But
yeah. Money drives everything in the United States for sure. And I can't speak to like NICUs outside of the US, but yeah, what you just described is so common. And we had a lot of people coming to us being like, how do I get in the NICU? And we were like, well, educate yourself, become so highly educated that you're such a strong candidate that they can't turn you away just because you're an SLP and not like, OTPT.
Yeah.
And then we can advocate for, like you said, that collaboration between like, hey, we really need the SLP and the OT, or the SLP and the PT, or whatever, in the NICU together, collaborating. And obviously, like outside of the NICU, I think that's so key. I feel like I spent like half of this podcast for like 2 years just talking about collaboration, team. And it's so interesting because it's still such a big issue. Like it's gotten a little better, but mostly in private practices that are private pay, or in situations that are more holistic and also private pay. And I'm like, do we see a theme here? And the one, they posed this question to me at the end of this live that I just did a couple hours ago. And they were like, if you had just a question like that you could ask, and not necessarily to them or like just the listeners or just whoever, they're like, is there a question that you would pose to like to the audience or whatever? And I was like, the thing that's coming into my mind right now, and I said, let me give you like a little backstory. And like when I lived in Maryland and we would have these study clubs pre-pandemic, like literally at my kitchen table, and we would have one case that we all were working on, but there'd be like an oral surgeon, a PT, an osteopath, an RDH, an SLP, OT. Sometimes we even had like a vision professional like there sometimes, like, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but I'm like, we'd have like 7, 8, 9 professionals sitting around, like an airway dentist, ortho. I know I said release provider. Anyways, all of us sitting around the table looking at the same case. And you mentioned this before, like we all see things through a different lens. And we all had something very critical to add to the conversation surrounding that patient case. And so I was like, my question is like, it's not how do we all collab. And I think I basically said like, how do we do that and bring that like forward, like to basically address every patient case, which is the overall question. But truly, I think the deeper question there is, how do we do this that so it fits into today's like tight time frame model, like that basically also meets the demands of health insurance in America, and but ultimately so that we're coming forward and bringing a patient case the best possible care needed, right? Like how do we do that? How do we collaborate, right? So do you have the answer?
Oh no, I wish. I was thinking like, where do I go? Where do I start? Do I start at the state level?
Oh man, so I'm like, I feel like that's my like dream world, right? Like if everything was perfect in this world, we would be able to collaborate as a team. We'd all lay our eyes on the same case, have a discussion around that case. Every single professional that needed to be on the team would be on the team, and it would not be challenging to get to that place where we're all collaborating. And then from there, it's like we also would have a way forward, and hopefully the most like effective and efficient way forward. And honestly, it would save money. So that's probably not ideal in the eyes of a health insurance model, but here we are.
We are, yeah. Now that's a great question. Like I'll be thinking about that. I mean, my next goal for myself is I want to advocate for something, and I don't know what yet because there's so many things, and I just feel like the insurance world does bug me a lot, and that's why I don't take insurance. But there's so many families that have insurance and they want to use it, but I do think they're a problem. So it's like, do I advocate? How do I even go about advocating for something like that?
Yeah.
The rates for therapists are just decreasing year after year, and inflation's rising. And I was like, well, what is going on here? Why? So I don't know. That's just a future goal for myself, to advocate for something. I just have to find it, narrow it down.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's like as you're saying that, I'm thinking back to what I've done. So early on, especially like in the pandemic, I got connected with this like charity, Bread for the City in DC, where they were helping individuals who are like homeless and helping people who get back, on their feet and get job interviews and get housing and kind of just like really get them back on their feet. And my husband's like law firm at the time, I think, was doing like pro bono work for them, and that's kind of how I got connected to them. And then I also had been connected for years already to Dream for Kids DC, which is now, I forget what they call themselves now, but they like merged with another chapter, and I think they go by a different name. I'm like, now I'm gonna have to look it up. It's still Dreams for Kids DC. No, it's not. That's a Wix website, and it's not redirecting me. Okay. Anyways, but it was this really, really cool organization where they had both children with different, needs, and, whether that sometimes was financial, but sometimes it was educational, sometimes it was medical, just all different needs, and allowing them a place to like play adaptive sports and the cool thing was they would have all these clinics, and they would bring in like some of the big sports names like locally. And so these really cool opportunities for these children and their families. And it was just like, this is such an amazing cause. And like the efforts, and like my friend from growing up, it was like the director. So I was like, hey, how do I help? Like, what can we do? And so I just started taking a certain, like, I would donate like 10% of my proceeds from my launches to like one of those, or I'd split it between the two of them. And I was donating, tens of thousands of dollars like annually to these different organizations. And then, I had a friend, hairstylist, and like someone I just love talking business with, whose son actually passed away from DIPG. And so we had been doing that race every year before the pandemic. And, we were like a sponsor, like one of the smaller sponsors. And I just feel like when you start like dabbling in a little bit of that and sort of giving back and giving like, forward in different ways, whether you're like donating your time or you're donating money, I feel like that's such a great way to kind of figure out like, where do I want to be, and like and it also just gives such meaning behind the work you do, because it's also like, we're not just raising money, like, hi, I'm in business, I want to make money, and that's totally okay. But also like, I really enjoy giving, and this gives me another channel of doing that, and just another way that I couldn't do without this course or without this business, so that's really cool. But then I also just the other day was like thinking about this, and I was like, I don't have it in me to create like a foundation per se, but I always think of there's the Dysphagia Outreach Project. I haven't checked in on them in a while. I used to I've donated to them in the past, but not recently. And I know like they had a food pantry. And so, people with dysphagia who needed certain products, and they would work, I know, with sometimes families and things to kind of help people get access to things maybe they couldn't get access to otherwise. I'm like, if there was just something like that for like team collaboration, like how do we get to, I don't know what the answer is. I'm like, but I don't know. That was like on my mind the other day. Clearly everything in my brain is team and collaboration all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of new therapists on Instagram who are doing great things. Like I think right now, SLP, I might be wrong, Business Queen or something, they were just at the Made for More conference, and I was like, that's great, because being a business owner or just a private practice owner can get lonely. Yeah. And having people come together with the same mindset and just to be able to share ideas, that's needed. So I'm seeing more and more things that are needed in our industry be created by people who are just like, I'm tired of waiting, I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give a little plug. So Ebony, who is SLP Biz Queen,
yes.
She's like one of the two, minds behind Made for More SLP and everything, the Made for More conference. And I looked into going this year, but it just like wasn't aligning with my calendar and like taking Lily to camp and everything. And she is somebody who does do like, like me, she also like mentors other private practice owners. I think, I always knew her as like the school contracts, or like that kind of like, that was like one of her first, like, I think claims to fame was like teaching people how to get like school contracts. And I know she's got a very successful private practice that does like exactly that. And she thrives, there, but she's got other business avenues too. She's brilliant, like a brilliant mind. So yes, 100% follow her if you're an SLP, especially if you want to know more about SLP school contracts. But I know she's got other things too. I just am like, I don't know what they all are. So I'm sure she's got it on her Instagram. But yeah, it's so fun to see like other people like step out in the SLP world and step into their own. Like Teresa Richards is also Teresa Richard, not Richards, Richard, is a good friend and colleague, and it's so cool to like see like what she's created. And then my friend Autumn Reed Henning, it's cool to see like what she's created. And so it can be very lonely, but also I think that, in the past, like there was more gatekeeping. And I feel like this current generation of SLPs are more open. Like, yes, like no one's going to be like, hey, come talk to me for 5 hours and I'm going to give you my whole business plan for free. Like, that's not what I mean. Right. But like people are like happy to connect and happy to collaborate and happy to like, help one another out. And it's like, there's got to be like some sense of reciprocity there. But I feel like things are shifting and I feel like, SLPs generally like we should be good communicators. That's like what we do, right? There is that component.
I think what that makes me think of is just with Instagram and social media, and I do see a shift. There's less gatekeeping. I think everyone in general, because I'm also now on the corporate side of things, everyone is just tired of that mentality of gatekeeping and making other people feel like you're lower than them and they know it more. And then when you get to know them, you're like, you actually don't know much. This is all a facade. And
so true.
Just everywhere I'm seeing that. And even with just getting a job outside of therapy, I was so stuck in, I'm just a therapist. I see a client. This is all I do. And if I want to, I can open up a clinic and that's it. Now I'm like, I want to encourage others, you can do so much more than that. You have a lot of transferable skills as an SLP, first of all. A lot, like in the tech job that I have, like it's easy. Like it's easier than being a therapist for me. And even like starting my own business was easy. So it's just a lot of resilience is built, I guess, as a therapist. And
it's exhausting.
It is very exhausting.
It is taxing work. Yeah.
And like anything, like I did marketing a long time ago for a spa. And now that skill, now I'm doing marketing for a tech company for SLPs. And there's just so much. So if you are interested, just look at LinkedIn. Like I'm on LinkedIn every day trying to figure out what's going on in like ed tech, for example. But yeah, there's so much. And the reason why I even realized that was because I had a friend who made the switch. And then she asked me to go over a product and like use my SLP like perspective on things. And then even that didn't occur to me that I could be useful for like products, for example, for therapists. And after like 3 months after speaking with her, I saw a job post and I'm like, wait, I can do all of these things. And then I started researching like, how do I get out of therapy but still use my clinical experience and insight to help products? So we could do a lot more than we think.
That's amazing. And I love that insight because I don't think I ever really stopped to think about like how transferable our skills are. So you just taught me something like and it's so true. I mean, when you start to think of like juggling a caseload, even whether you're in the schools, whether you're in a private practice, time management skills, like behavioral management skills, like, communicating to not just children, but adults and having to change your communication style based on who you're, just like those skills, you know what I mean? And then I'm sure there's just so many other things. Like we have to be smart marketers, I feel like all the time, because you're literally selling therapy. Like you are selling your services. I don't think people realize this. And I tell people this all the time. I'm like, if you've ever worked with a parent of a child and you've had to explain to them why you're doing like what you're doing, you're quite literally selling them on why they should continue and why this works, right? And so I'm like, when you start to like shapeshift it and you apply it across, like, yeah, there's totally transferable skills, but I feel like you kind of just like, I'm like, I just want to go on LinkedIn now and like look at like, different, I'm just curious to see. I'm like, well, what else? Like, what is out there? Like, what am I not thinking of? And, but I do feel like I had two other thoughts, right? So one was, as you're saying this, I'm like, everyone thinks SLPs play with toys all day. Like you could literally go on like, what is it, Amazon now, and you don't have to be an Amazon reseller. You can just make videos. And if you have like, you can scan the household products you have. And if somebody sells them on Amazon, you can make a video. And there's moms who are like, I'm making $3,000 extra a month, literally just product reviewing things that are already in my house. And I'm like, hi, I think most SLPs could probably do that really well because like we sell our lives to children. I feel like we're like constantly talking to children and getting their buy-in. Like you can talk to other people. Just like, it's just a camera. You got this.
Yeah, the digital world is amazing of all the things you can do. And we're creative, right? So I used to create TPT resources. So I was like, I can make anything. Like I just made a planner and I'm like going to try and sell it on like Amazon KDP because I can. And that's more of like a fun thing. Like I'm not trying to make lots of money off of it. It's just because I could diversify all of these things. And again, it's interesting. At work, I have a reputation for being a perfectionist. But in like the SLP world, I'm like, I am like type B. Like, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not a perfectionist at all. But everyone's like, yep, that's Michelle's work for sure. And I was like, oh, if you only knew.
Funny. That's so funny. I always joke that I was like a type A personality until I had a private practice in children. And then it all changed. And then I became type B because I was like, there are not enough hours in the day to be perfect at all the things. Like I was like, there was like this really great poem that one of the principals I had at one of the first schools that I was in, where he like gave us a glass like green ball with this poem. And it was all about how like you can juggle different things in life, but like the most important things are the glass balls. And you always have to like keep those up in the air. And then there's the rubber balls that like will bounce, and don't break. And it's okay to drop those once in a while. And like he actually said, like, work is a rubber ball. Like you can drop it, it will still be there tomorrow. He's like, your family, like your health, like those are glass balls. And I was like, to have like a school principal like give this to the entire staff, I was like, that's pretty powerful. Now, this is someone who had a child with juvenile diabetes. And so I think he had come into a space in his life where he realized how important family was and how much work will always be there tomorrow. But I like had such an appreciation for that because I've used that metaphor like throughout my life. And yeah, I just think it's like, it's so powerful when we think about like the glass balls versus like the rubber balls.
Yeah. And again, it's very easy to think that all these rubber balls are important and they have to stay up. I think I have like, I use my husband as my accountability partner. Like he pulls me away from work and he's like, you're done. You're done for the day.
Good. That's so good.
And I do the same for him. We're like the same personality. Like once we're in this mindset of like, it's hard to get us out.
Yeah.
So
you're in the zone.
we're in the zone, but we have to pull each other out. Otherwise we're like, oh wait, we forgot to eat. Oh no, like, oh, it's nighttime. We gotta move.
Yeah. No. And I would say like that was one of the biggest things I had to work on too as a business owner and parent really, because like I could just stay in my office till 7 p.m. but like I have kids, I can't do that, so now it's like I can't do that. Although when I have help here, sometimes I will still do that because I know I have someone here helping. But it's still not conducive to the schedule that I want. It's not conducive to like what I want to be doing. And so like that's been one of my biggest goals this year is like maintaining my inner peace and protecting the space that I've created because I didn't have that space like 6 months ago, a year. Well, maybe I did 6 months ago, but like 9 months ago, 12 months ago, I didn't have that. I was definitely like this business owner who like, I felt like a chicken with my head cut off half the time. I always said I thrive with more on my plate, which I do. And I still do thrive with a lot on my plate. Like if I don't have enough, like I will just be like, whatever, I'll get to it later. It's fine. And then I don't get to it.
I do the same thing.
Right. But it's like, I can have a lot on my plate and still maintain like a lot of open space, which allows me to eat, which allows me to work out, which allows me to spend time with my family, which allows me to have like silence time or just like unplanned time. And I don't really know what's going to go into that time every day, and I'm like, that is something that felt impossible, like even a year ago. And so it's like one of those things like as a business owner that getting to a point of being able to like step back and create that. And the fact that you're doing this like so early on in your like business career is amazing because Honestly, I feel like so many people burn out. It's like everyone's like, oh, being a business owner is so easy. I'll just go do that. And then they work 24/7 and then they come to me or, someone else and they're like, help. Like I'm basically a slave to my business and I can't stop because this is how I make my money. What do I do? And I'm like,
Well,
been there.
I was forced to adapt this mentality because at my first launch, I actually ended up having the worst food poisoning of my life. I've never been that bad.
Oh
And
my gosh.
prior to the launch, like when we were getting close, I was looking at my analytics like every hour, and my husband was like, "You need to stop," and I didn't stop until food poisoning. And then after that, I'm like, things were okay, even though I didn't check every single hour. And so now I keep that first experience in mind.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's going to be okay. I'm just going to check maybe like 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I'm still on it, but it's not every hour.
Yeah, I'm always
like
like,
I
okay,
did.
universe, like, what's the lesson in that experience?
Yeah.
What were you trying to teach me when you decided to make me so ill I couldn't look at the computer?
On my first launch ever.
Right? Oh my. So you want to know something? On my first launch, I ended up miscarrying a child and it was the beginning of the pandemic. And we didn't have like big plans to get pregnant or anything. And so like, it was just sort of like out of left field. And but the world also was like shutting down. Like I remember it was so I feel like part of me was like, okay, I'm going through something, but also like other people's. And I was also working with a business mentor and he had like a shaman brother-in-law. And I feel like I was getting a lot of like very enlightening information about like what was happening in the world. And so I actually was not panicked over like the pandemic, which I think everybody else was like in panic mode. Now, I also worked for myself. I also felt like I had control over how much money I was making. I felt like, a lot of people felt like I'm out of a job or like I don't get paid because I'm not working for 2 weeks and the 2 weeks turned into 3 weeks and 4 weeks and 6 months and a year. And it's like, so like rightly so, people were panicked. And I just remember like, here I am going through my own thing. Nobody really knows about it, but I'm having dance parties with my kids on Facebook Live because people are freaking out and we all just need to take a chill pill. Like we all just need to like take a deep breath and like we're all going to be okay. We're all going to get through this. We don't know what this is, so let's not freak out about it right now, But I remember just like it was like such a wild experience and yeah. And it's interesting too because I have a friend who's like she's always like call it like God, the universe. Some people say devil. I don't know, like whatever you want to call it, whatever it might be, will try to knock you down. And as many times as that happens, it's just your job to like get back up and keep on going. Right. And like not let that bring you down, even if nobody enrolls, even if nobody shows up, like, even if ... it's like you tweak and you continue forward. And I think that that's like the people who are successful, the ones who don't let those things like truly just end things for them. Because some people be like, oh, this is a sign that I shouldn't be doing this. And I'm like, no, this is a sign that I need to like switch up how I'm doing things, but I am still doing this. Yeah. So I love that you're still doing it.
Yeah. That ties into what you said about like knowing when to keep going versus knowing when to stop. There was something on LinkedIn where there was just this discussion post and I'm like, I think it was about interview questions. And I'm like, I think what's a really good interview question to ask these days is, we have this new generation, Gen Z. I don't know if you've like seen all the reels about that, Gen Z versus millennials.
Yeah.
And I'm like, first of all, I applaud the new generation for having strict boundaries, but I also feel like, you got to know when to keep going and when to quit. You can't just quit on the first try. And so I think the question that I asked was like, I would ask them like, what's your criteria to keep going? Right. So I think having like, for me, it's like a deadline. Like even the platform that I chose, like I was between Thinkific and Kajabi, I was bamboozled into it. I'm just telling you right now, their marketing is top notch because I was Thinkific and as I had the card in hand and I like saw Kajabi AI and I was like, sold. I don't even use it. I don't even use the AI.
Neither do I.
But, what was I saying?
Just the criteria for like Gen Z, like when do you stop? And
But that was just an example. Like I have a deadline. I'm like, I need to have a platform by this and I'm not turning back. Unless, like after a while, like I know I could, if I don't like Kajabi, I could switch to something else. Yeah. But that's kind of how I approached my entire business of like, here's a deadline. We're going to get to this and we're going to keep moving and we're going to keep moving. And then like, I'm going through this place of people need to know who I am. Yeah. And I'm not going to get people signing up right now. And that's an emotional roller coaster in itself. Like constantly prepping yourself and giving yourself the pep talk. And that's a lot. Like I have moments where I'm just like deflated, but at the same time, I believe in it so much. So that's really what keeps me going. And I don't have a deadline yet for like when I'm going to stop. Like I'm still very, very confident in this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's, I'm like, I know we're coming up on an hour and a few minutes and no, but I'm like, we can keep going for a few, if you have a few. Cause I think the whole like Gen Z, and I feel like I should have someone on here who's like Gen Z, right? Cause you're a millennial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cause I'm an elder millennial. So, it's interesting. So I just went to Microsoft Copilot and typed in, because I wanted to see, I was like, difference between Gen Z and millennials with work. That's all I typed in. Like that was my prompt. And it's like outlook and mindset. Gen Z tends to be more cautious and risk averse due to witnessing the instability faced by millennials. They focus on generating security through their choices, whereas millennials generally have a more optimistic mindset and are often entrepreneurial and inventive. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, that checks, right? And then with like independence versus teamwork, Gen Z values independence, prefers figuring out themselves. Millennials place higher importance on teamwork and input from others. They thrive in open office plans and enjoy social engagement with coworkers. And I'm like, okay, these things are, checking for if you want to make some generalities, right? Generalizations. Tech and experience. Gen Z grew up with cell phones and the internet, making them tech savvy and diverse. Millennials were the first generation to grow up around the internet and mobile devices, facing economic challenges from student loans and recessions. And then it's interesting, like comparison, I guess, with experience. Activism and causes. Gen Z integrates activism and social justice into their daily lives. Millennials became invested in activist causes during their free time. So it's like, where I was looking for like ways to get involved, like with money that I'm making and in my free time, they're like integrating into like every aspect of their life. It's fascinating kind of to look at this. And then it says education and stability. This is the last one. Gen Z is concerned about the cost of education, focuses on finding their dream job. Millennials value stability and experience pressure to attend college. So I wonder if there's like less of a push with like Gen Z to even go to college, because I guess like there's so many ways to make money now that you may not need. I mean, obviously there's certain things that will always require like degrees or advanced degrees. But it's funny because I remember hearing Mark Cuban say, I don't know, probably 4 years ago at this point, maybe more. I've totally lost track of time. But basically saying like college will be obsolete in 20 years. And I think that's, I have a business mentor who is in the online education space with many of his business partners or people that he mentors. And he's like, there is this massive push towards online education. We're seeing it in so many different ways. There's somebody that lives in my neighborhood, and the company that he works with provides virtual reality to nurses, or like in nursing programs where you don't have to be in a hospital or a private practice anymore, or clinic or whatever. You can just be in your living room, and it's like literally like someone's handing you the patient chart even though they're not there with you, and you're literally treating the patient even though they're not there with you. And I'm like, this is wild to me, like so wild that that's where we're at. But I'm like, I can also see where like the traditional college model could be obsolete in 15 years, because there is such a shift now moving into the online education space. And that's one of the reasons why I started my other business. I was like, medical professionals are burnt out, like you're saying, right? Like they want more. Let's channel that knowledge we have into creating online education. Let me teach you what I did, like that kind of a thing. And relate, because so many people kept asking me to teach them. And I was like, I don't have enough time in the world to do this all one-on-one, but I can create something and like, we can, do this as a group. but yeah, so it's fascinating, but still very early in that online education space. Like you are like still like with your course, even like you're still on the earlier side of like, give it 5-10 years, it will be so, what's the word? Like where everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? Like I'm like not infiltrated. I'm trying to think of like saturated, like the market of online education. I think like 10 years from now will be saturated. And I've even had like a colleague and mentor say, like friends say, he was like, I do think there'll be a lot of regulations, like government regulations over content and courses on the internet and stuff. And so now that's where like we're even looking at maybe going through like the credentialing stuff for some of our certifications, because I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot. I used to follow, and I haven't looked into this, but the virtual reality world. I mean, I think people were like buying real estate there, and like they were trying to make classrooms and programs in there. And granted, I'm assuming that that means everyone's going to need a headset at some point, and that's I've stopped watching and like following it, but it's a lot. And I personally haven't like have a hard time grasping like seeing this and being successful. But I'm sure that if you grow up in it, it will work and it'll make sense. But for me, I'm like, I'm just so in person. Like I'm hands on. And
yeah. But you know what? What's interesting too that you say that, there is definitely, because with all this AI stuff, there's still such a desire. And this, I don't think this is just like millennial and older. I think this is across like ages and, you know, different groups. There's still this desire for human interaction and for interacting with a actual human. Like, I'm not just talking when you call in and you get an automated thing on like, you know, a helpline or something. I'm talking like when it comes to therapy services, when it comes to customer service in a business, when like people are like, is this a real human? I want to talk to a real human, right? And then obviously like with friends and relationships, because humans thrive on that. And I'm like, AI will never, I don't think AI can ever fully replace that. Like, sure, maybe like a helpful Q&A or chat bot at the bottom of a website. Fine, great. But beyond that, I have questions. I want to talk to a human. Like the AI can only do so much, you know? So there are some companies that I've seen do it like really, really well. And I think like they're onto something, because I'm like, there are other companies where I literally haven't bought their products because you can't get past a chat bot. And I'm like, I don't have enough information to invest this amount of money with you, but this person over here is willing to talk to me. So that already gives them a major like one up, you know, and we've moved onward and I forgot about you over here. So
yeah, that just, I mean, my husband and I talk about like businesses all the time, and we're like, okay, in a couple years, we need something AI proof. So our minds are like already thinking like, what's always going to be needed that AI could never replace? And like, how do we beat the system? How do we beat the race? So just, I'm sure you think about this too.
Yeah. It's that. And it's like the marriage of like, you know, because all the time, constantly to my team now, I'm like, guys, look at this tool. I don't know how to use it, but it seems cool. And then like we forget about it and move on. Like that's literally like, if Taylor hears this, she's going to laugh, because she's going to be like, Hallie's literally forwarding us something probably on a weekly basis that she sees on Instagram or that pops up in an ad or whatever. And I'm like, this kind of sounds like something that could be helpful for us. And then we might take like a peek at it and be like, yeah, no. You know, and so it's like we've integrated certain automations, right? And certain things, and like Zapier and like, you know, like back end business process type of stuff. But that's like to help the team and help like workflow and like those kind of processes. It's not the front end customer service stuff. So I feel like if you have a business that requires like customer service, or even if you're the person who's providing the human component, whereas like 9 out of 10 others are not, I do think that you will always be successful to a certain degree, because there is always going to be a group of people, a large group of people who still prefer that human over the computer.
We don't need to answer this question, but my mind went to like future generations who grew up with not having the human component. Like I'm just like, how would they feel? It doesn't need an answer, but I'm just thinking like, you know, we're used to that. What happens if people grew up without it? That might be odd to them.
Right.
And they would be like, this
who knows,
is weird. Right? This person's talking to me.
Right. That could be like 20 years away. Who knows?
Not in my time, so I'm kind of glad.
Exactly. I'm like, I'm good. I'll be good by then. My kids will have to deal with that. Amazing. Well, this has been amazing, Michelle. Thank you so much for your time. Tell us again where they can find you and your course platform and your Instagram, all the things.
So thank you for having me. This was so great. And you can find me at the Pediatric Source on Instagram and also the pediatricsource.com.
Amazing. Thank you again. And I'm excited for everybody to check out your course. I appreciate you and love this little like businessy conversation that went like 10 different directions because this is so how my brain works.
Yeah, and I like it. I love it. It's how my brain works too.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more of these MyoTots airway and feeding related episodes, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and share this episode on your social media platforms. You can access free resources and all I offer at halliebalkin.com or pop over to @HallieBalkin on Instagram to get all the latest updates.